the previous modules, you've learned about opioid use disorder, or OUD, and the science of medications for OUD. In this module, you'll learn more about your role as a community provider in working with individuals engaged in MOUD who are justice involved. In your work as a community provider, you may work with individuals involved with the legal system who are reporting to a probation officer as part of their community supervision. The most recent data from the end of year 2020 indicates that 1 in 66 adults in the U.S. are under community supervision. As you have learned in earlier modules, substance use disorder is a critical concern for many people on community supervision. Researchers estimate nearly 60 to 80% of individuals on probation have a substance use disorder. Limited data makes it hard to estimate the number of individuals with an opioid use disorder on probation. However, remember that we do know around 71% of drug-related overdoses are associated with opioid use. As you can see, opioid use disorder is a critical concern for individuals on probation. The legal system is one pathway to treatment services for individuals with a substance use disorder. The structure and external motivation of being under probation supervision helps some clients engage with treatment and achieve therapeutic goals. In some instances, the probation department may also fund treatment or other important support services, like housing or transportation, that assist the client in recovery. When individuals are on community supervision, they're frequently court-ordered to complete a substance use assessment with a community provider and comply with their treatment plan. As a community provider, you may have concerns that individuals who are court-ordered to services may be less forthcoming with you or frequently non-compliant with treatment recommendations. Although it's normal to have these concerns, it's important to identify such assumptions or biases, since they don't help clients and may even detract from your work with them. Finally, you may also have experiences with the legal system or hold strong opinions about law enforcement, the legal system, and/or how substance use is addressed within the legal system. It's important to acknowledge these experiences and feelings, and identify how they could impact your work with individuals who are engaged with the legal system. Talking through these issues with trusted colleagues and your support system may be useful if you find working with this population challenging. When an individual is court-ordered to treatment or referred to treatment by a probation officer, or PO, one of the PO's roles is to make referrals and monitor the individual's compliance with assessments and treatment plans. The PO may request to exchange information with you during referral, treatment initiation, and ongoing treatment. Most probation agencies require individuals on supervision to sign a standard release of information that details the specific information to be shared between the PO and the community provider. The PO will typically send the signed release during the referral process. If you don't receive a signed waiver, you should follow up with the PO to request one in order to provide information about a client's treatment without violating HIPAA laws. Some community providers may be concerned that communicating with an individual's PO may impact the therapeutic relationship with their client. Community providers may also be concerned about how the information may affect the individual's outcome in the legal system. These concerns are common and understandable. It's important to acknowledge that court-ordered treatment can introduce unique dynamics. Despite this complexity, in most instances, a community provider can work effectively with the PO to establish support for the individual during the treatment process. Throughout this module, we'll discuss specific ways to manage your role as a community provider during this process. During the assessment process, the community provider is responsible for conducting diagnostic assessments to determine appropriate treatment options, reviewing the assessment results with individuals to help them understand the results, and communicating with the PO and the individual how identified needs align with supervision requirements. Your first contact with an individual's PO will likely occur during the referral process. Some POs will contact a community provider before making a referral. The PO may have specific questions about the treatment and support offered through your practice, policies and practices within your agency, and logistical information such as hours of operation, insurance, and transportation. This information helps a PO determine if the individual may be a good match for your agency. Other POs may contact you to share information about the individual as part of the referral process. These initial conversations with the PO are an opportunity to discuss the treatment process, how you work with individuals as a community provider, and how you can work in your respective roles to support the individual during the assessment and treatment initiation phase. It may be helpful to develop a brief written overview of your MOUD protocols, including how you measure treatment progress, monitor medication compliance, and what other wraparound support services you may offer. Providing these types of information helps the PO become familiar with the treatment process and establishes reasonable expectations about the course of treatment. Sometimes, a PO will not contact you until after the assessment process is complete, typically during treatment initiation. Because you may not know the individual you're meeting with is under community supervision, it's useful to ask this question during the intake and assessment process. For some individuals, being involved with the legal system is a source of shame or embarrassment. This may create barriers to successful engagement if left unaddressed. Being involved with the legal system may also impact the individual's employment, finances, relationships with family and friends, and even their ability to drive. This information is relevant as you consider appropriate treatment options and supports that may be needed. Individuals on supervision may also have concerns about how their assessment results will be shared with their PO and how this may impact their outcome in the legal system. It's important to establish rapport by acknowledging these concerns. It can be useful to provide concrete examples of what will and won't be shared with their PO. For instance, it can be helpful to explain that you might share diagnostic information and treatment recommendations with their PO, but assure them that sensitive information they may choose to share with you, such as past trauma, will remain confidential. Later in this module, we'll talk more about sharing information if the individual transitions into treatment. Based on the assessment results, you'll work with the individual to prioritize treatment needs and develop a treatment plan. This conversation will often involve discussing the appropriateness of MOUD and other treatment options available. For many clients with an opioid use disorder, MOUD is an appropriate component of the treatment plan. As you're working with the individual to develop your treatment plan, it's important to broadly address common concerns related to OUD treatment, especially MOUD. Let's discuss some of the most common concerns that arise during treatment initiation. Some individuals recognize if they take certain medications, they'll test positive for opioids and are concerned this might not meet the conditions of probation around substance use. More importantly, they may be concerned that a positive test will result in a probation violation. Some individuals might perceive that their PO does not support the use of MOUD. Others may fear that they'll be forced to stop MOUD without notice if they're sentenced to jail for a violation or as part of a sentence. It's important to discuss these concerns with the individual and their PO if needed. Some individuals might currently be engaged with groups like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous that are more likely to support abstinence-based treatment. They might believe MOUD makes them ineligible to continue engaging in these groups. Or they might be fearful they'll experience stigma related to MOUD from their sponsor or others, including their family members. A video in Module 3 provided an example of a man who was successfully maintained on MOUD but was rejected by a faith-based support group. In such cases, it may be important to remind clients of their successes, the evidence behind MOUD, and offer referral to more appropriate supports. Other individuals might have an aversion to medication or medical care more broadly. People of color may be more skeptical of medical care and therapeutic medication because of the medical community's historical exploitation of these communities. Bridging cultural divides is critical to facilitating treatment initiation, retention, and completion. Specific training and coaching in cultural sensitivity for organizational staff, including intake and direct care staff, as well as administrators, may help bridge cultural divides. Additional strategies include ensuring that materials in the office have diverse persons represented, offering gender-responsive services, leveraging the healing value of traditional cultural, familial, and peer connections, and acknowledging and addressing historical trauma where appropriate. Finally, as treatment begins, you may need to work with the individual on any shame they may feel and address any perceived stigma regarding OUD or use of medications for OUD. You should also prepare to have this conversation several times, as the client may not initially be ready to start treatment or may be very reluctant to use medication specifically due to shame or stigma. So far, shame and stigma, client trust and engagement, and cultural considerations have come up during this module. Community providers are in a good position to help the client with each of these. Although beyond the scope of this module, there are approaches that can be used for each of these considerations. As one example, motivational interviewing, or MI, can be used to enhance engagement and trust, address stigma, and it's frequently effective with diverse persons. Think about raising training interests with both colleagues and supervisors. There are also books on MI and training offered in the community on MI for continuing education credits. Throughout the course of treatment, you'll need to continuously reassess if different treatment approaches are needed. Part of reassessment will include identifying treatment barriers and communicating with the individual and the PO about how to address these barriers. Finally, you may need to communicate with the PO about how their role can support continued engagement, particularly during periods of return to use. As discussed earlier, monitoring treatment compliance is a part of the PO's role. The release of information that the client signs will typically detail the information shared between the community provider and the PO. However, you should discuss specific scenarios with the PO, such as missed appointments, non-compliance with medication, admissions of return to use, and drug and alcohol testing results. Identifying when and how this information will be shared will prevent misunderstandings and miscommunication as you work together to support the individual. Once there's a clear understanding of what and how information will be shared between the community provider and the PO, the community provider should discuss these specific topics with the individual to be transparent and build trust. One of the most common concerns community providers have about working with individuals who are justice involved is that some probation agencies or court policies require that the PO notify the court if an individual misses a treatment appointment or returns to use, even briefly. These policies are misaligned with treatment goals and can disrupt treatment if jail sanctions are imposed. During the initial conversations with the PO, it's important to ask about the agency's policies about return to use. While you likely can't change agency policy, you might ask the PO how best to provide information about the individual's treatment engagement overall, so a brief return to use can be put in proper context. Communication is pivotal in facilitating MOUD. Related to this, having a clear understanding of the roles of the community provider and PO is essential. For example, you don't both want to make the same or contradictory referrals for supports or services. To summarize, it's important that community providers, POs, and clients all have clear expectations regarding how communication occurs, sharing of information, and understanding of roles. A frank and collaborative stance during these discussions can assist in minimizing misunderstanding and enhance the working relationship between the client, the PO, and the community provider. We've provided a bonus activity for community providers to work through a common scenario that often arises between POs and community providers. We encourage you to spend time on this activity at the conclusion of the module. Throughout this module, we've primarily focused on the information you, as a community provider, might share with an individual's PO. There's also information the PO should share with you, as the community provider, to support the individual under supervision. You should request that the PO notify you if they have concerns that an individual is misusing medication, has stopped taking medication, or is diverting medication. Because POs often conduct frequent drug testing, they may identify early warning signs of medication noncompliance. For example, the individual may test negative for substances when they should test positive, or the individual may test positive for substances that are not prescribed. This is important information to inform your treatment planning. It's also critical that the PO notify you if an individual has been incarcerated. If this occurs, you and the PO will need to discuss who is best to contact the jail medical provider to alert them about potential withdrawal and detox while in custody. As you begin working with a new PO, it's helpful to reinforce why this information is important to you as a community provider and the individual's safety and well-being. For more information about the role of the PO throughout the treatment experience, watch the companion Module 5, The Role of the PO in MOUD.